There's a post on X from Iran's IRGC intelligence unit that I want to read to you in full, not summarized, in full, because the specific words matter more than the headline. There is only one way to read this. Trump must choose between an impossible military operation or a bad deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran. The room for U.S. decision-making has narrowed. Read that again. Not a military operation, an impossible military operation. The IRGC is not saying America will lose a war. The IRGC is saying the specific military operation that would resolve this conflict, the one that achieves American objectives, is impossible. Those are different claims. America can bomb Iran again. America has 3 aircraft carriers in the region. America can resume strikes on nuclear facilities, on energy infrastructure, on command and control. America can destroy a great deal. What America cannot do, the IRGC is claiming, is achieve its stated objectives through military force. The nuclear program cannot be eliminated by bombing. The IRGC cannot be destroyed by bombing. Iran's sovereign control over Hormuz cannot be transferred to American hands by bombing. Those objectives are impossible, not hard. Impossible. And the alternative is a bad deal, not any deal, a bad deal. Iran is telling Trump, the good outcomes are not available to you. Your choices are an impossible military action or a bad diplomatic result. Choose. I want to spend today evaluating that claim seriously, not accepting it as Iranian propaganda, not dismissing it as posturing, actually testing it against what we know about American military capacity, Iranian resilience, and what 64 days of war have produced. And then I want to explain what the 14-point peace proposal Iran submitted the same day means in the context of the IRGC's ultimatum. Because the proposal and the ultimatum are not contradictory. They are 2 parts of the same message. Let me start with the impossible military operation claim, because this is the most significant strategic assertion Iran has made in 64 days, and it deserves a rigorous examination. What would a military operation that achieves American objectives look like? America's stated objectives in this war are clear. Trump has said them repeatedly. First, Iran must never have a nuclear weapon. This means not just stopping current production, but eliminating the technical capacity to ever produce one, the enrichment facilities, the centrifuge manufacturing, the weapons design knowledge, the material stockpiles. Second, freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. This means Iran cannot restrict passage, charge tolls, or seize ships. Third, Iran must stop supporting proxy forces, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Shia militias in Iraq, that threaten American allies and interests. These are 3 separate objectives. Let me evaluate each one. Can American military force eliminate Iran's nuclear capacity? Operation Midnight Hammer, the joint U.S.-Israeli strikes on February 28th, targeted Iran's nuclear facilities. Natanz was struck. Fordow was struck. Isfahan was struck. The strikes were described by American officials as setting back Iran's nuclear program by years. But setting back is not eliminating. Before the February 28th strikes, Iran had 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, enough, according to experts, for approximately 11 nuclear weapons if further enriched. That uranium exists. It may be in underground facilities that were not fully destroyed. The knowledge to produce more uranium exists inside the heads of Iranian nuclear scientists who did not die when the buildings were struck. The centrifuge production capacity, while damaged, exists in facilities that were not struck or can be rebuilt. The IAEA cannot currently access any of these sites because Iran suspended cooperation after the strikes began. The nuclear knowledge cannot be bombed. The institutional expertise of Iran's nuclear scientists cannot be bombed. The centrifuge blueprints, which exist as digital files distributed across multiple secure locations, cannot be bombed. Precision strikes can disrupt and delay enrichment activity. They cannot destroy the knowledge base that makes enrichment possible. More strikes can delay. They cannot eliminate. The NPT verification specialist Jeffrey Lewis told Al Jazeera that on the 2 biggest issues, enrichment and transferring highly enriched uranium, the US and Iran remain far, far apart, and military force does not close that distance. Can American military force restore freedom of navigation in Hormuz? Hormuz is 29 kilometers wide. The IRGC Navy has gunboats, mines, anti-ship missiles positioned on both Iranian islands in the strait and command posts distributed along approximately 2,000 kilometers of Iranian coastline. The United States Navy has established that it can intercept surface vessels using the strait. 48 ships have been redirected. 3 have been seized. That is real coercive power. What it has not established is that it can clear the mines Iran has placed without Iran's cooperation. The Pentagon told Congress it will take 6 months to clear Hormuz mines after the war ends. 6 months of clearing after the war ends, which means any military campaign that resumes bombing cannot simultaneously and immediately reopen Hormuz. Bombing the IRGC's coastal infrastructure degrades its ability to add more mines and lay more traps. It does not remove the mines already there. And Iran has lost track of where some of its own mines are, according to earlier reporting. Bombing does not open Hormuz. Only Iranian cooperation opens Hormuz. Can American military force stop Iranian support for proxy forces? The IRGC's Quds Force operates through a network of relationships, funding flows, and organizational structures that have been built over 40 years. The Houthis have their own command structure and weapons manufacturing capability developed specifically because they anticipated a scenario where Iranian supply lines would be cut. Hezbollah has weapons factories in Lebanon, some underground. Iraqi Shia militias have their own supply chains from Iran that run through multiple countries and through networks that survived the maximum pressure campaign of 2018 to 2020. America killed Qasem Soleimani in January 2020, the most operationally significant figure in Iran's proxy network for 20 years. The network continued under Esmail Qaani, Soleimani's successor. Striking command and control nodes degrades the network's efficiency. It does not terminate relationships built over 4 decades between Iran's IRGC and organizations that have developed independent operational capacity precisely because they planned for the loss of central command. On all 3 objectives, the IRGC's claim that the military option is impossible deserves to be taken seriously. Not because Iran is invincible, it is not, but because the specific objectives that define success cannot be achieved through military action alone, regardless of how much firepower is applied. The military can inflict enormous damage. It cannot achieve the objectives. Now let me test the claim from the other direction. What would America need to succeed militarily, and how much of it does America currently have? America has 3 aircraft carriers in the region. That is extraordinary military power. America has the most advanced precision-guided munitions in the world. America has submarine-launched cruise missiles, stealth bombers, and air superiority that Iran cannot meaningfully contest. America can destroy a great deal of Iranian infrastructure, military capability, and economic capacity if it resumes full-scale operations. But American military success in a resumed campaign would require several things that currently do not exist. First, a clear and achievable objective that military force can accomplish. As I just described, none of America's 3 stated objectives is achievable by military force alone. Second, domestic political sustainability. 61% of Americans say the war was already a mistake. In a poll from Friday, that number will not improve if bombing resumes and oil goes to $150. Third, allied support. NATO was not consulted before February 28th. No European ally has joined the blockade. Germany called it humiliation. Britain refused to participate. A resumed campaign against an already declared ceasefire would be even more isolated internationally than the original strikes. Fourth, a viable end state. Every military campaign requires a theory of how it ends. How does resumed bombing end this war? Iran does not have a parliament building where a surrender can be signed. The IRGC does not have a headquarters building whose capture ends the organization. There is no geographical objective whose seizure terminates Iranian resistance. The IRGC's claim that the military operation is impossible is not propaganda. It is a reasonably accurate description of a structural problem in American strategic thinking about Iran. The military can inflict enormous damage. It cannot achieve the objectives. Now let me explain what the 14 points mean in the context of this ultimatum, because they are not separate events. They are the same message in 2 registers aimed at 2 different audiences. The IRGC's impossible or bad deal ultimatum is aimed at Trump personally and at American strategic planners. It is written in Trump's language: options, choices, binary decisions, deal or no deal. The IRGC knows Trump thinks in those terms. It is presenting the strategic landscape in a format that Trump's decision-making process can process. Here are your 2 options. It is also aimed at American military planners who are preparing the short and powerful strike option that Axios reported. It is telling them, we have analyzed your military options and we have a name for what they produce: impossible. The 14-point proposal is aimed at the negotiating process and at international observers. It is Iran's maximum position expressed as a formal document through the established Pakistan mediation channel. It contains elements that cannot be agreed to in any recognizable form. Reparations, 30-day total resolution of all issues, U.S. military withdrawal from the surrounding region. These are the ceiling of Iran's aspirations, and it contains elements that are genuinely negotiable. The nuclear framework, the Hormuz mechanism, the sanctions relief timeline, the frozen assets release, the Lebanon ceasefire confirmation. Reparations cannot be accepted by any American president. That is not a negotiating constraint. That is a domestic political impossibility. Trump cannot tell Congress, we agreed to pay Iran reparations for bombing them. The reparations demand is either a placeholder that gets traded away for something else in exchange, or it is a signal that Iran's opening position includes something it expects to lose in the negotiation, which means it expects the actual deal to give America something on reparations. Smart negotiators always include demands they expect to drop in exchange for concessions on demands they intend to keep. The 30-day timeline is similarly instructive. America proposed a 2-month ceasefire extension. Iran countered with 30-day total resolution. That is not Iran saying negotiations must conclude in 30 days. That is Iran saying the ceasefire framework, where fighting is paused but the blockade runs and pressure continues, must end within 30 days, one way or another. Iran wants the limbo to end, not necessarily with a complete peace agreement, but with a clear direction, either moving toward resolution or moving toward clarification that there is no resolution available. Iran is tired of the ceasefire blockade hybrid. 30 days is Iran's deadline for the limbo to end. Together, these two documents, the ultimatum and the proposal, are Iran saying, the military ceiling has been described, the diplomatic floor has been offered, what happens now is determined by which direction America chooses to move, toward the proposal or toward the ceiling. Trump's response, can't imagine it would be acceptable because they haven't paid enough, is Trump refusing to acknowledge either document. He is not rejecting specific terms from the 14 points. He is not engaging with the impossible or bad deal framing by explaining what he believes is possible. He is announcing that the precondition for any engagement, Iran paying enough, has not been met. That precondition is undefined. There is no metric for enough, which means the refusal to engage is indefinite until Trump decides the price has been paid. That is the gap the IRGC is identifying when it says the room has narrowed. The gap is not between Iran's 14 points and America's 9 points. The gap is between Iran's willingness to negotiate now and Trump's precondition that Iran must suffer more before negotiation is appropriate. Let me now add the contextual details from Saturday that make the IRGC's framing more credible than it might appear in isolation. First, a fully laden Iranian tanker carrying 1.9 million barrels of crude oil, valued at approximately $220 million, successfully evaded the U.S. Navy and reached the Far East. TankerTrackers, the maritime monitoring group, reported this Sunday. The blockade has been running for 20 days. CENTCOM says 48 ships have been redirected. One tanker carrying 1.9 million barrels slipped through. That is $220 million of Iranian revenue that the blockade did not prevent. It is the most concrete evidence yet of the blockade's ceiling, real, significant, but not impermeable. The IRGC is watching this data. The claim that a military option cannot achieve its objectives is partly based on the evidence that the economic coercion option has not achieved its objectives either. If the blockade cannot be made hermetically sealed, the economic pressure theory of capitulation has a structural limit. Second, Iran's parliament is set to approve a law formally governing which vessels can transit the Strait of Hormuz. Under the proposed law, Israeli vessels will never be allowed through. Ships from hostile countries, explicitly including the United States, will be required to pay war reparations before receiving a transit permit. This is Iran moving from de facto control of Hormuz to de jure legal codification of that control. Once the law passes, Iran has a domestic legal basis for everything it has been doing since the ceasefire. The tolls, the seizures, the prohibitions. That legal basis matters. It means reversing Iran's Hormuz policies requires not just a diplomatic agreement, but also the Iranian parliament repealing a law. That is a more complicated process than a foreign minister changing a policy. Iran is making its Hormuz position structurally permanent before any deal is made. Third, the IRGC said separately that it is on standby for a return to war, calling hostilities likely. It cited specifically that evidence shows the U.S. is not committed to any agreements or treaties and pointed to the 2018 JCPOA withdrawal. The IRGC is not just claiming the military option is impossible for America. It is simultaneously preparing for the scenario where America tries the military option anyway. Standby for war means operational plans are ready, units are positioned, command authority is pre-delegated. The IRGC is preparing for the outcome it says it hopes America does not choose. Fourth, the new Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei issued a statement declaring victory over the United States and proclaiming Iranian sovereignty over the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. A Supreme Leader declaring victory on the same day his foreign ministry is submitting a peace proposal is a specific kind of political communication. It is saying to the Iranian domestic audience, we are negotiating from a position of strength. The peace proposal is not capitulation. It is the victor setting terms. And the terms include reparations because victors ask for reparations. The IRGC's ultimatum is the strategic communication to America. The Supreme Leader's victory declaration is the domestic political framing that makes any eventual deal presentable to the Iranian public. Now let me Steelman Trump's position, because there is a serious case that the IRGC's impossible claim overstates Iran's position. The IRGC's framing assumes that the only military option is one that achieves all three American objectives simultaneously. But America could define a more limited military objective, not eliminating Iran's nuclear program entirely, but setting it back far enough that a deal can be signed from a stronger negotiating position. Not restoring freedom of navigation completely, but degrading Iran's ability to interfere with non-Iranian vessels enough that the economic pressure shifts decisively toward Iran. Not ending Iranian proxy support entirely, but striking specific Hezbollah infrastructure in Lebanon that has been continuing attacks. Limited military objectives are achievable. The question is whether limited military success produces the domestic political cover for Trump to sign the deal that looks bad from the IRGC's 14-point framing. And Trump has a CENTCOM plan for exactly this kind of limited resumption. Axios reported it, the short and powerful wave of strikes option, not a full campaign. A demonstration, something that lets Trump say Iran received the additional price it needed before the deal was made. A demonstration strike followed by a deal is not the same as an impossible military operation followed by a bad deal. It is a bad deal preceded by a political justification. Here is where the Steelman collapses. A demonstration strike resumes the war after a ceasefire. Every country in the world, including America's allies, would describe that as America restarting a war it had declared over. Germany's Merz already called the original strikes humiliation. A resumption after ceasefire would produce a much stronger international response. The political cost of that description is significant, even if the military cost of the demonstration itself is limited. And Iran's response to a demonstration strike would not be passive. The 14-point proposal would be withdrawn. If Iran is negotiating and America bombs, Iran stops negotiating. That is not speculation. That is Iran's explicitly stated position throughout this conflict. IRGC said in Islamabad that Iran will not negotiate under attack. The proposal submission itself required a ceasefire. Resume bombing and the proposal goes off the table. The IRGC, which is already on standby for a return to war, would activate, not gradually. The standby posture means operational plans are ready, units are positioned, and command authority is pre-delegated. A demonstration strike turns standby into active engagement within hours. The Bab el-Mandeb card gets played. The Houthis, who have been holding back specifically because Iran's diplomatic track is running, receive the order. The Red Sea closes alongside Hormuz. Brent goes to 150 or 160. Goldman Sachs's models break. Every airline that survived Spirit's shutdown calculates its new fuel cost. The short and powerful demonstration produces a significantly larger war on multiple fronts simultaneously. The IRGC is right that the room for decision-making has narrowed. The demonstration strike option exists in theory. In practice, its secondary consequences convert it from a short and powerful message into the thing it is trying to avoid. A war that gets longer, more expensive, and less controllable with every iteration. The IRGC described two options, both negative. The room has narrowed. That description is accurate. Iran sent 14 points. The IRGC called the military option impossible. The tanker with 1.9 million barrels reached the Far East. The supreme leader declared victory. Iran's parliament is codifying Hormuz sovereignty in law. Trump said, can't imagine it would be acceptable. Watch what happens when Trump reads the exact wording he said he would receive. Not the concept, the wording. Because the wording of the 14 points will tell both sides what the actual gap is between Iran's maximum position and America's minimum acceptable terms. And that gap is the only thing that matters for what happens next. The IRGC has described two options. Watch which one Trump's decision-making produces. If you found this useful, push back on it in the comments. I will see you in the next one. One more thing. The analyst Paul Musgrave told Al Jazeera that on the two biggest issues, enrichment of uranium and transferring highly enriched uranium, the US and Iran remain far, far apart. He said Trump has been unyielding that Iran must surrender its nuclear capability. And he noted that a slight softening in the Iranian proposal is that Iran may have given up its precondition that the US cease its distant blockade of Iranian traffic before negotiations begin. That softening is significant. Iran has moved off the blockade must end first requirement. Iran is now willing to discuss terms while the blockade runs. That is movement. The IRGC knows it is movement. The impossible or bad deal ultimatum is the IRGC saying, we have moved. America has not. The room has narrowed because Iran moved while America insisted on cry uncle before moving. Watch the 14 points carefully when Trump reviews the exact wording, not the concept, the wording, the specific language around the nuclear framework, what timeline, what verification, what mechanism, is where the actual negotiating gap lives. If there is flexibility in those terms, a deal is possible. If there is not, the IRGC's two options remain the only ones. Iran sent 14 points. The IRGC called the military option impossible. The tanker evaded the blockade. The supreme leader declared victory. Iran's parliament is codifying Hormuz sovereignty in law. Watch which option America's decision-making produces. The IRGC has already told you both of them. If you found this useful, push back on it in the comments. I will see you in the next one.